all our relationship with our doing art, okay, and with this memory. So when you talk, now I'll try to do a question, but I just try. It should be better if you talked about the part you ordered. But when you talked about Adorno and this question of memory, I could not understand exactly, well, excuse me, what you ordered or what you take from Adorno, from... Desculpem, mas é complicado. I understood at the end the so many possibilities and questions you put about it and you gave about art and this relationship. But the question of memory and relive and vivify this question of torture, this question of suffering, and the terms of Adorno. If you could clear it, should be okay.
Yes. The question from the Adorno question is a question that he raised about art, and he was referring specifically to poetry, to lyric poetry, and he said that to write poetry after the Holocaust was barbaric, because even he understood the political project, which was never to forget, right? All of Holocaust literature, Holocaust art is about that, never forget. And of course, that's a title of all of our books in Latin America. Nunca más, for example, in Argentina. All these things are never again. We cannot forget. We cannot allow this to happen again. The question that he raises is, even though we agree with that, how do we do it aesthetically? That, and that's the problem, that's the issue. That art is by definition aesthetic. It converts the pain, the suffering into some kind of aesthetic mode. And that, he feels, does an injustice to the victims, because we're turning their pain into some kind, ultimately, of pleasure. And I think it's a real issue. I think it's one of the most difficult ethical questions that we as artists and people who study theater have to deal with. I think it's especially serious in theater, because theater, as you all know, sells tickets around the world usually because of sex and violence. Those are the selling points of theater. People pay to see sex and violence. So we know that there's a voyeurism, there's a pleasure in that already. So if we're trying to make a political point about the disappeared, or about victims of torture, or about Jews in the Holocaust, or any of these issues, it's very difficult to do it in theater. So the question is, do we just abandon theater as a mode of dealing with these issues? And my feeling personally is we can't abandon theater. We have to be able to use all the means available in order to discuss these issues. Very often the artists are the ones who are most vocal, most perceptive about some of the issues in society. When historians maybe aren't publishing, or when other kinds of scholars aren't able to get their work out, we can do plays in corners, we can do all sorts of things that transmit what's happening. It's like a reality testing. Sometimes the television is controlled, all these other means are controlled, so theater gives us a way of responding with the very, very real violence that's taking place in our societies. So I don't think we can give up theater about this. What I was concerned about was, how do you represent it? And it seems to me so important a question, especially, as I say, for all of us who have lived in societies where we have to deal with this violence constantly. And it seems to me that the danger of eroticizing it, of making it pleasurable through the woman's body, is one of the worst things. First of all, because the metaphor of the woman as the country doesn't work. And secondly, because the one thing that you can never talk about if you're using the woman as the metaphor is about violence against women. Right, because she is not the subject of debate. She is the background, and the battle is taking place on her body. So In Argentina, during the Dirty War, more than a third of the victims were women. So how do you talk about that? How do you talk about what the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo did? How do you talk about the way the women participated and were the victims of social struggle if the woman is going to become a metaphor? So I think that that's one of the dangers. So it just seems that it's something that we have to be very, very careful about. And I hope that answers your question.
Eu gostaria de saber uma coisa muito simples, mas que eu acho fundamental. Eu acabei não entendendo qual era a forma de resistência que você propunha e que estava na sua frase final. Eu lhe peço que repita essa frase. Como?
Repete, por favor, o final da pergunta. A forma de?
Resistência. Ela falou em resistência e eu não entendi o que ela disse. E acho que é um elemento fundamental de toda a fala dela. Essa frase final. Peço para ela repeti-la simplesmente.
What I was saying at the very end, I think that's what you were saying, that it's against a diminishment of perspectives that we have to struggle, is that I think that the discussion about who is allowed to speak and who's not allowed to speak is a dangerous debate. And I think a more important way of, or a more helpful way of phrasing a question would be, how do we all see it from different perspectives? And people do have, all of these different positions about conflict. If you're living in a country, if you're directly involved in it, if you're watching it on TV from, CNN, there are many, many different ways in which people are involved in conflict. And I think one of the things that I wanted to argue is that we're all involved in all of these conflicts. For example, when I pay taxes in the United States, I know that my tax money is going to support the US military. And I know that that's going to support the war on drugs, that is having a terrible effect on many populations in Latin America, in Peru, in Mexico, in lots of different places. So that I feel I have a responsibility as a taxpayer as well as an intellectual to think about the many ways in which we participate in these dramas, in these social dramas. And also, the other thing that I think is very important is to recognize that repertoires travel. So it's not just, that certain works of art travel. It's not just El Gran Teatro del Mundo, that goes, or Cats, or, these other works. It's also fantasies, fascist fantasies, for example, like you have the neo-fascists now in the United States, you had the fascists in Argentina that modeled themselves on the Nazis with the uniforms, with the regalia. So these are parts of cultural repertoires that unfortunately belong to all of us, and that I think the discussion with ECUM about